Support comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday, Veterans Day, and we're taking the day off. Back tomorrow, though. Today, here's a story from our friends at KUOW's The Wild podcast.
I'm in this little patch of forest near my house, and I come out here quite a bit to hike and relax and just think, kind of recalibrate. And recently I've been thinking a lot about this magazine article I read in a doctor's office. It was about 6 years ago. I was bored in the waiting room, and so I picked up a magazine. And the article, it was titled, "Take 2 hours of pine forest and call me in the morning." And it was all about why we should be spending time in nature. And, you know, it was a long article, and I couldn't wait to get out of my appointment to finish reading it, which I did. And I sat there for an extra 45 minutes. And I've been thinking about that article ever since. Because, you know, when you're out in the woods or walking along a beach and you feel healthier and happier and more content, even maybe more alert and more alive. And I'd always wondered, why is that? I knew I felt better in the woods, but this article was suddenly telling me why. It highlighted the benefits of nature, but it was backing up everything with scientific proof. You know, nature can lower your blood pressure, fight off depression, help you sleep, and may even help fight cancer. From KUOW in Seattle, I'm Chris Morgan. Welcome to the Wild. Modern life, it demands our attention.
What's happening on the American border?
Political groups in Lebanon.
There's a constant noisy flood of information.
The Mueller report is stock slumping again as the heat turns.
Our jobs never seem to end. I work for myself. I have a lot of different projects and I love them all, but it can be stressful. There's constant phone calls and texts and messages from my producer badgering me for script updates. And even life outside of work seems to be more hectic these days. It can all be too much sometimes, you know, the noise in our lives. So that's why I come to this place a lot, my forest. It's only about a 15-minute drive from my office. So I'm on this hiking trail. It's a 3-mile loop, and it takes me about 60 minutes to hike, but sometimes a lot longer. It's really peaceful. This trail, it's special to me. It's my escape from everything and everybody that demands my time. My mates sometimes ask me if they can join me, and I say, nope, sorry, this is where I get into the zone. Even my producer's only here because he's the guy with the microphone, right, Matt? He nods. This place, it's always reminded me of something that the famous naturalist John Muir once said. His quote was, "Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going into the mountains is going home. That wildness is a necessity." I love that. And it wasn't written this decade or even this century. He wrote that in 1901. Can you imagine what he'd make of today's world? That article, the one I read in the doctor's office, was a total page-turner. One of the things it talked about was the Japanese concept of shinrin-yoku, which literally translates into forest bathing. The Japanese actually came up with the term only in 1982, but the ideas around shinrin-yoku are much older than that. They're inspired by ancient Shinto and Buddhist practices. There's this harrowing Japanese term, karoshi, which literally means death by overwork. And it was getting so bad, the government wanted a way to encourage their stressed-out citizens to take a walk in the woods, to relax more. There are even official forest therapy hiking trails in Japan. They take this stuff really seriously. But I wanted to know how nature affects us physiologically. What is exposure to nature doing to us on a cellular level? I kept thinking about that Outside magazine article, the one I read so many years ago in my doctor's waiting room. And it turns out the author, Florence Williams, has expanded that article into a book. It's called The Nature Fix. So I decided to get in touch with her. Hi, Florence.
Hi, Chris.
So I saw your book in the bookstore the other day, and I recognized your name, and I couldn't believe it because you wrote the article in Outside magazine, and that article totally inspired my obsession with this subject.
Wow, you're kidding.
Florence had a lot of the same questions as me, and she spent time in Tokyo observing researchers measuring the effects of nature on the body.
So what they found is that even after, and this is sort of remarkable, after just 15 minutes of, what they call forest bathing, even after just 15 minutes of that, they were finding this reduction in heart rate, a drop in blood pressure, a drop in stress hormones like cortisol, some different brain wave patterns. And when I first heard this, I was a little bit skeptical because I thought, well, sure, people are they're outside and they're moving.
Moving and getting a bit of exercise. That would make anybody feel better, right? But these Japanese researchers controlled for that by also sending people to walk around urban areas for the same mileage and the same amount of time.
And they really only saw these sort of well-being effects in the forest walkers. So it was kind of intriguing to me.
And how are they actually measuring the physiological changes? How are they measuring cortisol, for example?
So with the cortisol, they have these sort of very fat kind of Q-tips that you suck on for a while. And they get some saliva in that, and they can have that analyzed pretty quickly for cortisol levels. And then there are other machines they use to monitor things like heart rate variability. And that measures actually sort of the difference between your heartbeats and can tell how quickly you're responding to stress actually in real time. And then, basic pulse monitors. There was a gizmolator that they can put on your head to measure some frontal cortex stuff. But at the same time, they have these, pretty well-established measures in the field of psychology that are just questionnaires. How would you rate your sense of frustration right now? How would you rate your anxiety? How would you rate your sort of mood? And those are pretty well established. And what they find in those questionnaires is that it really seems to correlate, again, to this walk in nature, but not so much the walk in the middle of the city.
One of the researchers in Japan looking into this idea of forest bathing is named Cheng Li. He's looking at how spending time in nature can improve our immune system and killer T cells.
Killer T cells are really important for fighting things like cancer and various infections. And he's been specifically focused on these aerosols from the trees called phytoncides. And these are, chemicals that are sort of emitted from trees. I guess they're especially sort of potent and maybe useful from some of these evergreen trees that they have in Japan, like these hinoki cypress trees. And it's a combination of these compounds like limonene that smell wonderful. They sort of smell like, Christmas tree meets VapoRub. Is how I describe it. It's that kind of invigorating smell when you go into the woods. And what he's found is that after we're exposed to these, special substances and compounds, we make more killer T cells. Actually boosts our immune cells. And that boost remains quite high for 7 days after a visit to a forest.
You'd be proud to know I've got a little vial of hinoki cypress oil on my bedside table, thanks to you.
Thanks to I should have bought stock in hinoki cypress oil.
Yes, it's not too late. Wow, a simple walk through the woods is actually increasing our immunity and may even help to fight cancer. Dr. Lee, who has been studying this, suggests that everybody should spend time outside at least once a week. Get that high boost in immune cells. But even just once a month might really help you out. And it's not just the phytoncides that we can benefit from in the woods. There's a lot of biodiversity in the forest, microbacteria. And Florence says this exposure to a variety of bacteria during a walk can be a good thing too.
These are things that humans evolved with. We evolved with exposures to all these bacteria, and these bacteria may also help us fight, sort of illness or fight kind of worse bacteria. Sort of the more biodiversity we can expose ourselves to, the better. And that's part of this hygiene hypothesis, where kids who grow up on farms or in rural areas have fewer cases of asthma and allergies and things like that. So I think that's another intriguing possibility. And I think, the science isn't really totally resolved on this issue. There's still a lot to be done.
This idea that nature is medicine may be starting to catch on. A few doctors, both in Japan and America, have already started to prescribe patients nature and time outside. And the research doesn't just stop at improving the health of our physical bodies. Nature can actually help us get along better. It can make us better people.
So there's been some really interesting new work on the science of awe, 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 and that when we're in the presence of something sort of beautiful and mysterious, like an incredible sunset, looking at a mountaintop, or even just something as simple as, a butterfly kind of surprising us, right, in our path, it pulls us out of our own heads and makes us feel like we're part of something larger, which, seems like a sort of obvious thing to say. But it turns out that concept of being pulled out of ourselves is really, really important to our sense of well-being and to our psychology. And if you think about it, it's not something that we really experience very often in these lives, where we live sort of isolated and indoors. Maybe we see a cool video, on Facebook or something. But in general, we're not exposed to the kind of awe found in nature that we were, in a more primitive life when we really lived outside. So I was really interested in exploring this idea of how, in some ways, wilderness is actually good for civilization, because it makes us feel like we are part of a community, that we have a responsibility to each other. And studies have shown this, that even in a lab, after looking at photographs of like a waterfall or of a whale, that we behave in ways that are more generous to other people. There's certain ways that the researchers have of measuring sort of altruism. And it seems like it's really partly impacted by this feeling of awe.
It's nature that connects us all, every one of us. It's nature we're from. We were wild, and there's a big part of us that I think still is wild, a bigger part than we might imagine in this crazy world we've built around ourselves. Scratch away at the surface and we're all just hairless apes after all. But I'm hoping that even us hairless apes remember that nature can change us, and it can change society for the better. And in return, society should take care of nature too. What a great relationship that could be. And perhaps it all just starts with a walk in the woods. The wild is inspired not just by nature, but by people who work in it, love it, protect it. There's a ton of information on the website if you want to find out more. The Wild is a production of KUOW in Seattle, in partnership with my work at Chris Morgan Wildlife. Our producer is Matt Martin. Thanks
me.
Matt. Jim Gates is our editor. Hey, Jim. Brendan Sweeney is our managing producer. Thanks, Brendan. Our fact checker is April Craig. Hey, April. Get all these facts right. We had engineering help from David Brown. Nice work, David. Our theme music is by Michael Parker. Rock on, Michael. I'm your host, Chris Morgan. Thanks for listening from a soggy wild, folks.